Believe it or don't, some threads still continuing from the last time. For those of you just walking in on this, not absolutely unconnected to my unspecified new myth of creation, but some of the lingering threads. Consider how obvious it is that nothing could actually exist without its opposite. In the past I've done this in a sense with words, showing you that there's got to be at least two words, there's got to be at least two thoughts, there's got to be at least two of anything in a 3D existence for the first one to exist. There had to be two words so that you have the first one to compare it with. But you can look at it quite specifically, not just to play with words, but quite specifically like this, that it has to be an apparent opposite for anything to exist. There could be no competition without agreement. I'll make it maybe simple. It's so simple that somebody should hurt your head by slapping it real hard. There could be no competition without agreement. You could not have a race between two competitors unless the competitors beforehand reach some agreement. Where's the starting line? What time does the race begin? What's the distance? I'll get in lane 1, you could take lane 2. That's not just funny. There could be no competition of any kind. There could be no conflict without collusion. You could not have two sides, forget just what appears to be a sportsmanlike contest of turning one's thighs and other parts up and down to run around a circle. What appears to be actual conflict between armed camps, between sides, there has to be a kind of collusion. That is, they have, let's say over something that really seems to be abstract and permanent and of great depth. Fighting over the questions of good and evil, for instance. Two sides, that's always the classic historical view to ordinary consciousness, that the great wars, not these little piddling wars, but the great wars that the gods were in favor of, were always on some great moral basis. Fighting over questions of good and evil. Two sides, and the grander the war was, the more diametrically opposed were the sides. And yet, there had to be agreement beforehand. If they're going to fight over evil, the sides, these two armed sides had to agree over the concept, as erroneous as it may be, as misled as it was, the good side, let's say, has got to reach agreement with the other side about what the good side's defining as evil, which of course the other side doesn't, but that's not the point. They have to agree over that which they're fighting over. And they do. I'm not being funny again. Think about it a second. Do I have to draw it by numbers? They certainly, of course, do not sit down and their ministers of war or defense sit down and, quote, decide in the sense that you would three-dimensionally expect it. But there has to be a collusion. There has to be a preface of agreement that if one side claims historically that we're going to attack you over here because of the way you're mistreating your people, some of them are our relatives, you are an evil empire over here, an evil government, we're going to attack you. There has to be agreement. In other words, it is not going to happen if the other side says, well, wait a minute, where'd you get those stories? And they say, well, some people have been sending postcards over here saying, help us, this government's doing all sorts of things. And they say, we're not doing that. I mean, it's none of your business, but we're not doing that. You know, come over and look. See, that won't work. There has to be agreement over what they're fighting over. But now what's agreement? That's what I'm trying to get you into. Agreement is not the opposite of disagreement, any more than evil is the opposite of good. But they have to agree on the basis of what the conflict is, or there is no conflict. There can't be. So all of the things, all the way from the secondary activities such as races, all forms of competition, economic, physical, all the way into the areas that would appear to be less somatic, more intellectual, more emotional, where people are fighting over concepts, not over actual reality, not over physical reality, but over concepts. In every case, all the way from good and evil to a 100-yard dash, the competition, the conflict, cannot exist unless there is agreement between the competitors, unless there is a collusion between the conflicting parties, or else there is no basis on which to have the conflict, on which to have the competition. You could take it as a theorem, thusly, that that opposition sets the base for all operations. Variation. Conflict establishes the ground rules for all growth. Imagine, if you can, that I did specify this new creation myth of mine, which I have not. But if I did, then let me push it and say that we would have this kind of possibility that would have existed in my creation myth. The God's dream, remember your simpler ancestors with a small g, and having almost nothing to do with your old idea of what the gods were. It's not even close. They're your more simplistic ancestor. But the gods dream plans. And it's in this place where time is not a time zone and is not tied to space, which I'm not being funny about, I'm not going to tonight. I'm not trying to be cute, because that's the way that you plan. That's the way the human nervous system plans. But once it talks about it, it seems to have been established in some specific neighborhood with the coordinates that will not only show the neighborhood spatially, but what time you're doing it. But that's not the way it works, and see if you can follow. That's an aside. That was a pretty sticky aside. The gods, your simpler ancestors, simpler life forms, dream plans to and through humanity. And I remember we're talking about what might have been a part of my creation myth had I told it quite straightforwardly and specifically. This would be somewhere close to the beginning of the myth. The dream plans, consider the term for the second, of the gods to and through man would have, after creation got going in my myth, the plans come to and through man in three versions. Every plan comes in three versions, one for each of the three dimensions. For each plan, for each idea, for each dream, life sends out three versions of that same plan, a variation to each of the three dimensions, each of the three forces, each of the three myths running this world. What does this do? It does this. Each force, as it's supposed to, each dimension takes its plan absolutely to heart. And it also, just as inescapably, takes the two variations of the same plan, the same dream, takes the variations of the other two dimensions as being faulty. So not only is each dimension inescapably, having no choice, each dimension is driven to pursue the execution of the variation of the plan it was given, but it simultaneously, with almost equal vigor and transfer of energy, must criticize, must object, must oppose, even attempt to halt the erroneous actions, the pursuits of the other two dimensions in regards to this same exact plan. It is, for those of you that found it interesting, I was going to suggest would not be dissimilar if we took it down to a local level. Three mafia families trying to fight it out over control of how we're going to run this particular scam or this particular business. It is, in a way, undreamed of by Huxley and Darwin. It is survival of the super fittest, but not on the basis of local, personalized conflict between species or within the same species or between humans or between ideas. It's between forces, three different dimensions at our level, fighting to execute the same result, but in three different ways. What life ends up with at this level is the absolute best possible execution of the original dream. How obvious can it be? And yet, since the ordinary intellect cannot, under any conditions, find a conclusion of what's going on, cannot decide what is proper and improper, it can't see it. But let's assume, for the sake of my myth, had I told it, that from a more complex view, you could look down and say, well, here was a plan being executed within the framework of life, human life, and here was its conclusion, at least a relative conclusion. Let us say that from a more complex view that could be seen. Now, if that is true, what I'm telling you, you could see that, all right, from this view of this particular aspect of some human endeavor, this has reached a conclusion, you would look and it would be the healthiest, sleekest, sturdiest, most vigorous conclusion, of course still assuming that you knew what the original intent was, but the best possible conclusion to this plan, and it came about over here in the middle between the plan, between the dream, and over here the conclusion of it. In the midst of it, where humans are active, it appeared to be what? Almost total chaos. Non-stop opposition, conflict, competition. On the basis of these three armies, these three families fighting over control. And all of them, unbeknownst to them, working on the same dream plan, but they've got three slightly different versions of it. And so they're fighting like mad dogs. They got no choice. You're genetically wired up to do it. Fighting like a mad dog to fulfill your plan, because after all, the gods are the ones that told you to do it. And if you are not that old-fashioned, your own nervous system, your own talking to you, the noise of being alive told you, well, this is what should be done. And you worked at it. And just as vigorously, you had two other people, two other camps, two other institutionalized collections of molecular beings known as bunches of humans working on two slightly different plans. Now, of course, if you stopped to look, you would find at least one of them was in direct opposition to yours. And the other one was kind of an erratic tertium quid, institutionalized. But at any rate, you've got all this other conflict and competitors out there mucking about in the same area where you're trying to execute this plan, and none of you realize that what's going to happen is you're going to come out with the best damn possible model. It'd be as though that life had sent. I believe that I'm doing overkill because I believe a lot of you got it already. It would be as though life sent out that we have got to have, it's got to have, and therefore it makes humans believe they do, we have got to have an automobile, and we've got to have the best possible automobile. And so life sends out and sets up. And people don't realize, they think they did it, of course. It sets up General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. Erstwhile known in America as the Big Three. And so they're each in competition. They have industrial spies. They steal each other's ideas. They try and top each other advertising-wise. They do all sorts of things so that they, as far as they can tell, produce the best car. Or at least at the local level, it appears to be the most profitable car to their corporation, which, remember, at the ordinary level, economics appears to be success. But at any rate, there they are fighting, and let's assume that, using my example, that we do come out with the best possible means of automotive transportation. But it came about because of these three mafia families, these three competing armies, not knowing it, but they're all owned by the same corporation. Which again, for those of you that like this, is the kind of basis that makes the human nervous system respond to ideas of real three-dimensional collusions and conspiracies. Now, wait a minute. It just struck me, what if General Motors and Ford and Chrysler are not three separate corporations? Oh, I know they're set up. They got different shares out, and they've got different home offices and different boards of directors. They're three different corporations. I know all that. But what if, in the secret bank vaults in Tibet, I mean, it's got... Well, it's got to be more secretive than Switzerland, or somebody would have found it. But somewhere in Nepal or Tibet or Albania, there are records and there are meetings that actually one corporation, the great X corporation or something, owns all three of them. And they just keep, one of them goes up one year, one down one year, and they have bad models, and they have all kinds of troubles. And some of them are manipulating it all, so we'll all buy or a bunch of us buy General Motors cars one year, and they will purposefully make the transmissions only good for like 116 miles, and it falls apart. And so everybody gets real mad, or 30% of the people get real mad at General Motors, say, boy, next year I won't buy General Motors, and so they all rush out to buy the other two, and the same corporation says, no, of course not. Next year, the other two, Chrysler and Ford, we're going to up the prices because we know that they're going to be deserting General Motors, and we'll let that go a year or so, and then we'll make something bad happen with Ford. People won't want to believe such as that when they hear it. In fact, the more I talk about it, no, it couldn't be. Just a joke. But there is a reality behind that. The reality being what I've already told you, the dreams of life. The small g gods, your more simplistic ancestors, the generations right before you. The dreams they had coming from life to and through man sends out three distinct plans or models for an automobile when all life is interested in is the automobile. And it wants the best possible one. And what in a three-dimensional reality could be more efficient than to take these three companies, three groups of people, three humans, three aspects to one nervous system, and take each one aside and say, I'm counting on you. Here is what I want done, and I know you can do it. And I'm not even going. I don't have to ask because I know I can check on you. Take it, go with it. And then as soon as that guy leaves, he calls Elvin and he says, hey, I've been watching you. You and your kind. I got this plan. It got to be done. You're my chosen people. You're it. As soon as he leaves, he calls these other people, our persons, all the same thing. He says, hey, I've about had it. I need somebody to take over and really execute my will here. And here's what I want done. And they're all three just slight variations. Now, they can appear to be at absolute loggerheads to ordinary intelligence, but they're simply three variations on what it wants, such as, I want the best automobile. And it tells each one, separate corporation named so-and-so. And start off, try front-wheel drive. Tells no one, stick with rear-wheel drive. Consider opposition. Setting the absolute minimal necessary basis for all operations of ordinary life, and the variation that what appears to be conflict itself establishes the minimal ground rules for all growth. And yet notice, at local levels, ordinary intelligence, including very sophisticated, learned people throughout history, their nervous system verbalizes the opposite. That if we're ever going to have progress on this planet, what's the one thing we've got to get done with? Not just carbon monoxide. Conflict. If humanity is going to progress, we have got to stop conflict. And they even go so far as to literally, if not metaphorically, say we also need to cut down on competition, which is why reoccurring waves run throughout history, socialism, communism, always flowing, that we have got to stop competition. That's been the attack in your lifetime, some of you, on capitalism from parts of last body on other parts of the world. Is that ain't the way to go, because some people end up rich and some people end up poor, and what we need to do is level this out. And this kind of economic competition is not good for anybody. We need to we got enough food here. Why do some of us overeat, overstuff, get too fat, and we got people starving? Competition. It's useless. It's worse than useless. It's immoral. This flows through the ordinary nervous system, and it's almost the opposite of what my myth might have told you if I'd been that specific. I guess you can. I guess you can, since I even threw in one nervous system right in the middle when I was talking real fast while ago about groups of people or individuals. As always, you would perceive, those of you that have been around on tape, I don't know how many of these you've seen, but if any of this has any significance which I got a hint that maybe it does, or else I sure do enjoy hearing myself talk. Hello, hello, hello. It's how to use this internally, personally. You don't think you have such conflicts in you? You don't think that you have the big three automobile makers in you? If you don't think so, then you haven't been watching. You haven't been reading your local paper, that is, in here. Can you see that individually, although it cannot be readily seen, I will tell you that, I'll admit that to you in front, within the so-called apparent span of one lifetime, looked at from an ordinary view, this is very difficult to see, to say the least. But the same thing is producing the best possible results on an individual level of that kind of internal conflict on the individual. And yet at that level, what does life in general have people's intellect believing? That it's just the opposite. Why do people go to a psychiatrist? Why do people pursue the ritualistic execution of the myths of religion and gods? Why do people drink? Why do people talk about themselves? Why do people... They are attempting to do away with the internal conflict. They will even say so nowadays. Well, analysis has helped me a lot. There's so many conflicts. And then, of course, then they fall into the unconscious traumas of childhood and blah, blah, blah. But they're still saying, without actually understanding the full intent of what they're saying, because life doesn't need for people to, they are attempting to do away with the internal conflict in them. But I'm telling you, even though it's hard to see, to say the least, within one person's lifetime, if you're looking at it from an ordinary view, that this happens because many people seem to fail, many people seem to die miserable deaths, they seem to live miserable lives. But beyond all that, I'm suggesting to you that life is still, through this kind of internal conflict internally with each person, with each nervous system, is honing out the best possible result because of the conflict. And yet people are made to believe, well, God, I wish I could do away with the conflict. If you're not drawn to psychiatry, those kind of medical and social arts, if you're still drawn back to your forefathers' ideas of religion, the feeling of, if I was more religious, if I could be a good Jew or Christian or whatever, then these conflicts in me, on this basis, not unconscious traumas and etc., but the conflict in me, the battleground between good and evil, if I do away with that conflict, I would be such a better person. We'd all be better people. If we could all do away with that struggle inside, and we all, regardless of our religion, that all of us Muslims and Jews and Buddhists, if we could overcome the badness in us, the evilness, and all be good, no matter what we call ourselves, then we would have paradise. The Elysian fields, Valhalla, maybe with some heat in it. We would be in paradise without the conflict. Now, I would suggest to you, at that level, from that view, I suggest, nay, that contrary, if you could do away with conflict with ordinary people, at that level, you would not have paradise, you would not have the sunny Elysian fields, you would have, in fact, Valhalla, but you would have it now with air conditioning. In other words, you would have suicide time. You would have something approaching real demise of the human race. And yet notice, the dreams are still driven in one direction verbally, that is, we need to do away with conflict. Institutionally, on a large scale out there, and we need to get rid of conflict in here. Remember, those of you that can't remember, conflict and competition and a few other things I've said tonight. Remember this. They're just damn words, all right? Mark that down. They're just, how you spell damn? Words. Some more regarding myths. I guess you'll notice if I don't keep reminding you. I got to cram 2 or 3 years, maybe a gallon's worth within a short period of time here about the myths, because I'm not going to talk about it forever, even though I haven't talked about it directly. But more about this. Tell me and tell yourself what's up that all of the old myths, all of them, did you say all of them? Yep. All of them. Speak of right from the beginning, right as soon as things get created, very shortly afterwards. China, India, Iceland, Greece, Latin America, everywhere, the myths say right almost after everything got created and man got created, what's almost the next thing they say? Is something about man is created to suffer. Now, from various ways, if you were listening to me simply with ordinary intelligence, you would think that I have kicked the holy hell out of that kind of idea for a long time. In fact, I wrapped it up in my scientific, if not in my own humble way, spiritual way of saying, stuff suffering. Or to get a little more flamboyant for the people on tape, screw suffering. I can say screw, can I? Instead of the F word, can I say screw? Screw suffering. But, be that as it may for a second, what's up that all of the myths throughout the world, all of them throughout all times, as soon as they say wherever their story is, that blah, 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 and then blah, 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 created man. It usually takes maybe a sentence or so. And then what's almost the next sentence? And man immediately began to suffer. Or the gods that created man, then looked at him and said, suffer, sucker. Or sometimes there's a story about why he deserves to suffer. But the thing is, all religions, all myths say that man was created to suffer. Man is destined to suffer. Man is doomed to suffer. All right? Consider this. What if that's just another way that life has let the information been slipping out, having to do with me saying it's competition, it is conflict that produces the absolute best result? So in the midst of these three families, these three armies, these three forces fighting over the same goal, but with three different plans they got, each one trying to build the same, not an already identified car, but the world's best automobile, and all three of them believe they got the plan. They got the plan. It came from the gods. And even if you didn't use the word God, it came from your own nervous system. That is, it came from your own thinking, which, if you're not religious, that's the same thing. It came from my own noises. I know this is the best plan. How do you know? How does anybody know? Is there any doubt in your mind? None. Well, how about these other plans? Do you know that these other places are trying to do something they say along the same lines? Oh, yeah, I know all about it. And you can point out the folly of theirs. Or you can point out the faults. Oh, some of it may be, I know they say they're working for the same thing, the good of humanity. Or to jump back, cross paradigms again, I know they're trying to build an automobile. And I'm not going to impute evil intent to everything that the other companies do or this other guy. But I'm telling you, that's not the way to do it. Well, how do you know? How do you know anything? I know that what I'm trying to do is the correct way to go about it. All right, I know this. I know what they're trying to do is not going to work because I already thought about it. That is not a form of suffering. That what you're trying to do, and you know you're right, and you've got 2/3 of the world's population is working against you, and sometimes seem to be almost working along generally similar lines, but my God, sometimes they get so close to doing right, and they won't. That's not suffering. Forget just being hungry, which is bad enough, or being out in the cold, but we're now up to the so-called information age, which we're simply talking about an age that now, more and more, this end of the nervous system is more important than the ends down here, where you got other kinds of organs, the naughty parts that we can't talk about on tape, but you got the parts up here that's clean and pink. There's all sorts of little jokes and asides I could make, except for those puritanical people on just taping on the cable. At any rate, other than being hungry or being wet and cold, the conflict now, the suffering now is on the kind of conflict at this end of the nervous system of people, individuals and groups, trying to do the right thing. And you've got this great opposition. And you always, using general mathematics, you always identify more or less half the world, at least equal number to your number, opposing you directly. And then there's that naughty third part that nobody seems to notice. So it's even worse. That is, you know that there's one army, one group opposing you, but there's, of course, there's actually always two. Ford does not look, listen quick, some of you now looking blank, and I don't want you to imaginarily trip. Ford, at any particular time, does not look at their competition as being Chrysler and GM. At any particular time, they look at, believe it or not, as simply being one or the other. Or, if you can follow this is back to what I was showing you when you change from either or to either or, is Ford simply looks at the competition not as being, Ford does not look at it as being General Motors and Chrysler. They may look at it as being General Motors and Chrysler. It's one word. There is energy, there's validity to the movement of energy way beyond this, which I'm not going to get off on it, but there is, the only reason I'm stopping here for a second, a useful importance to that, because people do not even see, if you're following what I'm saying, that it's like 3 different versions of the same plan in any given area that life puts out. In any group, any person believes, all right, I got the plan. And they obviously always see there's some competition. But they normally identify the competition just as one category, one class, one other group that seems to be their active competitor. Or if you're in a race, you only see one competitor. Now, if I really made you think about this way, if you're ordinary intelligent, you might look around and realize you're in gate 1, let's say, and he's in track 2. And if I said, well, there are more than that, you might look around and realize, well, yeah, there are some more people, but you know who the competition is. I mean, there are only 2 real people in this race, me and this other guy, this other group. And if I said, well, there's always more, and you, oh yeah, but there has been. It's just to keep fill in the field. There's no chance they're going to win. In other words, they're not really in it. But they are. That's all I'm saying. That people believe, individually and collectively, that they see one specific camp of opposition, normally equal in number, size, intensity, vigor as themselves. Which, you got your hands full now. I mean, if you're in the heavyweight division, you weigh 212 pounds, you want to fight somebody weighing 212 pounds. That's enough, right? But people do not know it. They're actually fighting 2 guys that weigh 212 pounds. Work on that on your own. Can you not see that suffering, the whole idea that man should suffer, man's got to suffer, man inescapably suffers, rather than it being, which by now you should realize that it is, in reality, that the suffering now is not simply, if you're a Christian, that the Romans are going to come get you tomorrow and take you out and throw you to the lions. Or that if you're a Muslim, that the Hindus are not going to attack you. I know stuff is still going on in those skirmishes throughout the world, but the point is now the suffering of humanity now is not simply on the cutting edge in our part of the world. The majority, the middle class, the George Babbitts of the world are no longer going hungry. They're no longer freezing. The middle class, the suffering now is suffering up here. Not visceral, but it's now in the invisible world of ideas, the abstractions, not the actual natural reality. Of course, this is real enough. But that is where the conflict is now. That's where the competition is. That's where the suffering is. But look at it. That all the ideas that man should suffer, and then the myths come along afterwards and even make up stories as to why. Well, Adam and Eve, the gods, your more simplistic ancestors somewhere, did something, and their more simplistic ancestors, in other words, they're gods. So, well, suffer. Instead of a curse, can you see that what's called suffering could be another way of life expressing the reality that I've just put to you pretty point blank? That it is a kind of inescapable, and I'm just going to call it what everybody else would call it, competition, conflict. But it's life getting the absolute best possible results, the best possible dividend for its investment. There are other hints, the myths throughout all kinds of religions of some father that calls his 3 sons in. He tells all 3 sons that before I die, I'm going to give you a portion of my estate now, and go out and invest it and do the best you can. And the 3 sons go out and try to do something. Can you hear the same story? It's like the gods, it's like your ancestors, it's like the genetic state of affairs of man right before you gave everybody what seemed to be on one large scale, a plan, your destiny, what you should do in life, And then the two people next to you, it gave them a variation of the same thing, but just enough variation that it's not your plan, and they're in competition, if not opposition. And not only have you got to fight to get yours done, at the same time you've got to devote a large part of your energy to seeing that these other people don't get theirs done. Well, because theirs is faulty. They say they're after the same thing, and you go, yeah, I know. I know you say you are, and I'm not even going to bother to say that you're in some way intrinsically evil, but the way you're going about it is wrong. And so you got to not only try and build your car, try and run your race, you got to see that they don't build theirs. You got to try and trip the guy running next to you. Not because you're evil, but because his plan is faulty. And it's not. It's just a slight variation that life gave, and it's like, all right, duke it out. Let you three families fight over who's going to take over the numbers racket in Queens. And think, after they get through, the Colombo family, whoever it is, they end up, they got the numbers in Queens. Let's just establish it. They got it. Nobody else is going to fool with them now, whatever it took. Killing off of a bunch of other people with long names that end in vowels. Kill them off. But once it got through and the smoke settled, and now the Colombo family, whoever it is, has got total control of the numbers business in Queens, you do understand, I'm really pushing a allegory, I guess, but that's going to be the epitome. That's going to be the greatest example of a numbers racket possible. They're going to run the numbers racket over there until further notice. They're going to run that thing like a Swiss clock. Like a Wankel engine. Can you say Wankel on cable? Would you like to further consider this, though? After that paragraph, take a sub-paragraph. Miss Jones, take a letter. I'm not even cheap enough to do that one, am I? Fill in your own line. And if you can't, ask your grandfather whatever happened to the Borscht Belt in vaudeville, and he'll tell you what the joke is. Miss Jones, take a letter. A sub-paragraph to that I already brought up. How might you connect this? How might this fit in with what I seem to have talked about many times, sketching around, of saying this thing about, screw suffering. And I point out that everybody believes they suffer. Even now, living in the midst of the horn of plenty here in this country, people still, health is a big hobby. And I've told you that health is not a fitting hobby for somebody attempting to do this. In fact, the best attitude as far as it being a hobby, or even the possibility, is, I suggest the revolutionist attitude would be more like to hell with health. Of course, I used to say something worse before cable. It's F health was what I used to say, which was a variation of me, talking about apparently, the hell with suffering. But that's, if you're going to try and do this, whatever it is, then this whole thing about man is doomed to suffer, man was created to suffer, man was born to suffer. Yeah. But if you're going to do this, to hell with that. Not just theoretically, it's to hell with that. But how might that fit in with what I've just described? May I suggest that this might, by me saying, and don't worry about the point of me saying it, that's not what makes it have any possible validity, but the idea of to hell with suffering, or screw suffering, that, vis-a-vis what I've just been describing as being a natural, healthy aspect of life through people's suffering, that is, being in this eternal conflict with others and within themselves. How might this tie in? And I was going to say it might point to, might be pointing at an even more complex, an even sturdier, an even sleeker progeny potential. That is, this kind of revelation activity, just here and there off on little offshoot lines of the genetic growth, might be in charge of producing even brighter gods. Next paragraph. How about another theorem? How about another law? That sounds better than a proverb. Screw a proverb. Can you say proverb on cable? Don't personalize your life. And part of the connection with what I've been saying is, what I just started to say was, don't personalize your myth. But then that would assume that some of you pieced together the tail end of the last taping about me at least hinting around that what seems to be one's life, not just the behavioral, not just what happened to you, but what seems to be the history of you up here as an individual, is in some way a kind of myth. That is, if you had a beginning, that if you think back and that you have got your own creation myth, that you've got some conception that this in you, this individual part, came from somewhere, then you are in fact a myth. I don't mean imaginary, but you are in fact your own myth. But now what I'm saying is, if you want to take it as a real sentence, an idea, a law, a suggestion, don't personalize your life specifically, quite concretely. If you're trying to live along some sort of lines of this new creation myth, had I told it to you specifically, then I would suggest that one not use what appears to be your own I life as an example of anything. Of anything. Don't use what seems to have been your existence, both behavioral, motivationally, intellectually. Don't use any part of your apparent, use this as one term, I life, that your consciousness, of your conception of you being alive thus far. Don't use any aspect of that as an example of anything. And I'm going to tell you specifically how to do it. And it's going to come out, of course, in verbalization. Well, what did you expect? That's verbalization, though, if I knew how to do it. Method. Words, but it's energy. It's a new direction of energy. It is an alteration of the normal flow of energy, but here it comes out in words. And you can take it and use it, and if you are correctly drawn and pursuing whatever the hell this is, can you say whatever on cable? The method would go something like this. That is, of not using your apparent I life, your own, as an example of anything. Is if you're going to say something, if you're going to think something along these lines, instead of referring to I, to any part of your life, is to say this. I knew a guy one time that did so and so. Yeah, I met a guy one time that said that. Not, well, I've said that before. Well, I'll tell you what I did when this happened to me. I tell you, I knew a guy that one time this happened, this kind of thing, and he did very close to that. Did it? Thankfully, I don't have much time to go into. You forgot. Can you say thankfully on cable? The method related to threats. And everybody is continually threatening. Even those that believe that you're wimps and nerds and goobers and shy and bashful, everyone is threatening. Continually threatening. A variation of this method is do not threaten in the old way. But here's how you threaten. Let's assume that you're doing it to somebody externally. Is you do it this way. You say, let's assume you're talking to another person. You say, I know a guy that would do so and so if he caught you doing such and such. Not a direct threat from apparently your life to theirs. But, and you can do it if you, well, you do it sans any personal passion. You do not personalize it. You just, like, that they might be interested. You say, you know, I know a guy that if he saw you doing such and such, he'd do so and so. You know, like kick or whatever you want to say. But you do it on the basis of, I know this guy that if he, as always again, the question should be, is there any, or how to use this those of you that hear it and it's already affecting, how to use this internally in a non-personalized way. There is a variation right in here that is so good that it's why I said thankfully a few minutes ago, that is so pregnant that I'm almost thankful personally. Not personally. I know a guy that would be thankful. See, I can't really do that because I don't know a guy that would do this. So you'd know I'd be lying if I started to say, well, I know a guy that if he was here talking to you, he'd say so-and-so. I can do that, but I'm wasting my time. I'm eating up the tape because you must know that's not true because I don't know such a guy. If I did, I'd invite him here. Oh, I did. That's right. That's right. I knew this guy that a variation of this. It's a different energy mode of the same thing I'm talking about. See if you can hear this right quick. And I'm going to, at least for the time being, leave this with you. But it is extremely pregnant. I'm talking about almost obscenely so. It would appear to be, I'm almost tempted to call it a kind of variation of different personalized energy modes. And it can come about through such examples as this. Now listen, I'm going to give you two variations of the same thing. You could say, let's say in response, you're in a conversation, that is energy is flowing between you and some other person. You say, no, I didn't eat. They're talking about, did you maybe go out with the rest of the people there at lunch when they went? You say, no, I didn't eat. Versus, I wasn't hungry. It would have, if you've got to have a verbal hint, it would appear to be a difference between the former dealing with a personalization of motivation, and the second one talking about behavior itself. This is much deeper than the verbalization of it, because we're talking about different modes of energy. I'm hinting to you that there is a difference. It just happens automatically without any analyzation, without any awareness of there being any deep-rooted difference. This happens in life, but people say different things. You could say these two different things about the apparent same interplay of energies. At one time, you could say, well, no, I didn't go out to eat with the guys today. Or you might say, well, I wasn't hungry. Now, what this represents, me picking out these terms of no, I didn't eat versus I wasn't hungry. We're just using these, you surely understand, as a very non-local template, exemplary, verbally, of something much wider, deeper, more complex than the words themselves. But there is a difference. Not just the words, but if they were in operation as exemplary as I intend them to be, as paradigmatic as I intend you to consider it, there would be a difference beyond anything that the words could convey between, no, I didn't eat, versus I wasn't hungry. All right, I'll give you another one. A slight variation of the variation then. The difference between saying, in response, you're in a conversation, again, a flow of energies, and somebody's asking you about a certain, let us say, performing group, and you say, I don't like that kind of music, versus, I didn't go to that concert. It would now appear to be a difference in a telling, that is, a personalization of taste versus behavior. That apparently at the verbal level, what you're conveying, some other person asks you, did you go last night and see such and such down at such and such theater? And you say, I don't like that kind of stuff. I don't like that kind of music. Of course, you're conveying that chances are, no, you didn't go. Or the same kind of request, that is the same kind of information exchange. The person says, did you go last night and see so-and-so? And you simply went, no, I didn't go. I did not go to that concert. I did not go to that show. That does not belie that the latter contains the former. It's not even the point, but I don't want you to get hung up anywhere, because the words are not the limit of it. They're not even hardly the beginning of it. That you could say, no, I didn't go to the concert. And sotto voce, to yourself, you could be saying, because I simply hate that kind of crap, and I just don't say so because you evidently like it. That's not even the point. Not right now. It is, I'm suggesting to you, within, very shortly after, within a creation myth that was more up to date, would be some mention of how now creation, if there was a creation, let me just call it that the X factor created stuff and got humans going, created gods, and then gods created men, and then people began to think that energy, that is perception, flowed through the lens in only one direction. But at any rate, the creation myth would somewhere have to pick up the idea of describing why people would be driven under certain conditions, certain times, certain humidities, to say, I don't like that kind of music. Or, no, I didn't go eat. Or, I didn't go to the concert. Well, I wasn't hungry. Put it to you another way. So many of you are looking blank. Can you perceive of a nonverbal, beyond the limits of words, beyond the confines of words, a real difference between motivation and behavior itself? Not in any ordinary sense. Don't use the dictionary definitions or some psychological grip you think you have on it. Or can you feel a difference between taste, individual taste that humans seem to have in everything from music to art to zucchinis and okra? Taste versus behavior. A difference between, I can't stand okra, and a difference in not eating okra. If you can do that, then a difference between saying, I don't like okra, and saying, I'm not going to eat. They are not the same thing. They can apparently lead to the same result, that perhaps the big three will turn out their own individual cars, and perhaps between the three they'll turn out the best possible car. But somewhere along the way, Ford says, I don't like that kind of music. And General Motors says, no, I didn't go to the concert. Or Chrysler says, God, I hate grits. And Ford goes, I'm just not hungry. I don't think I'll eat. Internally. We are running out one more time. Well, we're close enough. Let me go ahead and wrap this one. Let me put it to you this way. We'll close with a verbal coda, a certain musical, if not verbal, semi-climax, at least the finish of the evening. That you cannot live, I'm speaking now to you people, not to life in any way, but you cannot live out your own individual heroic adventure, myth, if you personalize it. If you personalize your myth, and by myth that could contain everything that you perceive outside the ordinary realms of understanding, everything you know for a non-debatable, non-verbalizable fact, everything you know that even has no opposition or conflict within you, let's consider that the new myth of creation in you. If you personalize that, you have destroyed it. That you cannot live out any sort of real heroic revolution into yourself, any sort of extraordinary adventure, calling it a myth right now, if you personalize it. It's always nice, I know you people on tape appreciate, always nice to be able to end each taping on an absolutely irrational note. No, well, to me it was always a D flat. Bye. Are we ready? All right, I was going to give, since I've been doing it so seldom to the people here and on tape, first off, hi to Miami, to New York, California, Montana, Oregon, everywhere else, people getting this. But the three main groups, you people, I do not forget you. And I've got to admit there is a difference, even I'll admit, of coming to Florida and California and New York once a week. There is a difference between that and not having been there in several years. So. Now, look ashamed, all right. I agree, there is a difference. So hey and hello, and I have not forgotten you. I do not forget you. When I'm talking, I am aware of the serious people in the other cities as much as I am aware of the people sitting here. And I wanted to not only say hi, but I was going to give you a little something. I'm not going to verbally try and tie it to the myths and opposites perhaps being not as directional as you thought and all the other stuff I've been talking about here and there for the last few tapings, but I assume that you would suspect that there might be a connection. And I was going to give you another little method outside the public realm. And that would be this kind of method. It's simultaneous with everything that you think and say is to be asking yourself from a unknown, non-personal, and non-conclusive viewpoint, which is the key. I'll try and repeat it one time. But simultaneously be asking yourself, simultaneously with everything that you think and everything you say, you're simultaneously asking yourself, how am I going to explain this? Do it one more time. Is to, no matter what you're saying or thinking, is to be simultaneously asking yourself, that means non-verbally, and to help you, to simultaneously be asking yourself from no known position of judgment, no known personalized position, no known view that in any way comes to any conclusion, which I'm hoping you're following. What it means is, tied to the punchline of the method of me saying that you're simultaneously asking yourself, how am I going to explain this? The question is not based upon how am I going to explain this, comma, like from some kind of view. There is no kind of view. Not how am I going to explain, not how am I going to defend, how am I going to weasel out of this, because all that takes into, or is based upon, at least the tacit, two-dimensional basis that all verbalization and thought takes place, that to judge something, to even ask about it, to inquire about it, there has to be some premise involved. But that's the trick in this one. Is you're simultaneously, whatever you're thinking right now to yourself, maybe you never say it, or whatever you're about to say to somebody, is you're asking yourself simultaneously from no known position of judgment. In other words, there is no premise, there's no reason to do this. It's not in comparison, it's not in light of anything. It's just you ask, how am I going to explain this? Notice I didn't say to whom. To whom? That is why. To what purpose? There is no purpose. There is nobody, except the method is. I'll do it one more time and that's it. When something is that complex and oblique and irrational, to repeat it several times without any great elaboration, is that a boon or not? The method is whatever you are saying are thinking is to simultaneously be asking yourself from no known personalized, judgmental, or conclusive position, to be simultaneously, continually asking yourself, how am I going to explain this? I was delighted to say hi, but that's a lot better than any old hi. Hi. I'll try to see you soon, especially you people in the warmer parts of the country. No offense to New York, but might as well be honest. Every time I think about coming back to see some of you people, I don't know, maybe it has to do with that thing about water running around in one direction, the northern hemisphere, and then when you get in the southern hemisphere. It seems to be every time I think about coming to see somebody, maybe it's just the weight. I mean, since all of you know enough geography that you know that going south is downhill. Everybody knows that. Your grandmother never told you that? That's how you tell when you're out driving. If you're going downhill, you're headed south. But it's like the weight. Whenever I think, well, maybe I'll go see some of the people. And I'm sure it's not anybody's fault, but it's like the weight of Florida, closer to the tropics, at least the temperate zone. It seems to, but I'll fight it. I'll struggle against it. And if I go anywhere, I'll certainly come to New York as quick as anywhere.